Welcome to Why Such a Fuss, an exciting new channel dedicated to help individuals and businesses to learn more about data protection in a way that is easy and engaging. I'm Cristina from CVG Solutions, and I am a fully qualified data protection professional. I am passionate about educating, empowering, and enabling businesses to thrive. Remember to like and subscribe to this channel and help us to spread the word. Data protection is there for a reason. It protects you, your family, loved ones, customers, employees from coming to harm through the use of personal data. So make sure you click subscribe. Now, get ready to embark on a journey of growth and knowledge as we dive into the world of data protection. Continuing on with the GDPR and ISO Commonality and Similarity series, I have invited Annie MacNeely to join us once again. Annie is a quality management system professional and ISO 9001 auditor. Welcome back, Annie.
Thank you very much. Nice to be here.
Excellent. So Annie and I got together and we thought it would be nice to share the common mistakes that we both come across in our work as external consultants, with the aim that this will help businesses in shedding some light on how these mistakes hinder their business. So we've come up with a good solid list.
Quite a long list.
Yeah. So let's start. And the first in line is failing to involve all stakeholders in the implementation phase.
Yeah.
Certainly this, for me, it's key. Very often I go into a business, an organization, and I start, working and doing things, and then, we didn't know anything about it. What is this? So you get the resistance, and then everything falls apart because of that. It makes it a lot harder for us as a consultant, because obviously being external, we don't have the power or the authority, but also for the business itself. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I would agree wholeheartedly. I think it's important. Sometimes when you say stakeholders, people assume that that's kind of the decision makers and the more senior people in the business. From my perspective, when I'm putting an ISO system in, everyone in the business is a stakeholder to some degree. So let's just establish that before we go any further. But certainly there's probably three key reasons, and you've covered some of them there, to involve your stakeholders. One is because they have information that you need. So when it comes to writing procedures and processes, for example, the people who are carrying out those procedures and processes day in, day out are the ones who have the most knowledge about them. And I often see clients, if I'm not writing their processes for them and they delegate it to someone in-house, it often ends up being one person writing that procedure when there might be multiple departments involved, other key, inputs and outputs, and they're all sort of left out of the equation, and you end up with a procedure that only works for one person. So it's really important to involve stakeholders in that whole development phase of processes. The second thing, as you mentioned there, if you don't involve stakeholders, they're sometimes not even aware that there is a quality management system, which is alarming for starters. And you do carry out awareness training as part of implementing an ISO system, but that only sort of scratches the surface. If they're properly involved in implementation, they have a much deeper level of awareness, and alongside that, understanding. So they're not just aware that there's a quality management system, but they understand why it's there, how it benefits the business, what their involvement is, how it works, where it can go wrong, what their responsibilities are, all that other stuff. And that brings me to number three, and you mentioned this one as well. If they have that understanding and awareness, and they've been involved in the development, you're very unlikely to end up with a lack of buy-in. It's their project because they've been involved and they've been consulted. And so they're almost by default, they've bought into it by the time it goes live. You're always going to get the odd individual who's really uncomfortable with the change. That's human nature. But as a business, it's much more likely to be embedded in the business if you've had those people involved right from day one. And that makes for a much more successful system and effective system.
Yes, absolutely. And the same is, is with GDPR. GDPR is not just a top layer. It goes all the way through the
Culture, it's
organization.
cultural, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
it's cultural. And like you say, when the organization embark into implementing, GDPR or a quality management system, is not just about a process or a few documents. It is a change. It is, and therefore it requires involvement from all stakeholders. I always start with training because I make very clear that GDPR it's everyone's responsibility.
Yep.
There is always a tendency to think that it's just IT.
Yeah.
Or HR.
Yeah.
And it's not
quality manager's job. Yeah.
And it's not at all. It's everybody's responsibility. So I always start with that training. That sort of is almost like getting the buy-in or part of the buy-in from top down across the whole organization, and that always served me well. Which is great, and it's often misunderstood in terms of the level of work that is required. The expectations, it's going to be, it's a quick job.
They underestimate, and because they don't understand the depth and the reach of it at that early stage. Exactly.
That's right. Yes. So that actually leads me to the next point that we came across, which is failing to recognize or accept that it is a cultural change or shift. In terms of mindset, and so it needs other. It's not just about giving them a bunch of documents. It's like you said, getting everybody involved, because they have the knowledge to help us produce the document that we need to produce, whether it's a process, whether it's a policy, whatever it might be. But also because it is a cultural change, then they get involved, and therefore that breaks down the resistance.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Two things I would say there. Like you, I start so once a customer's signed on the dotted line, we're going to do this. I always encourage my clients at that point to send a message out to the whole company saying, right, we're going to do this. This is what it means. This is why we're doing it. This is why it's important. Everyone's going to be involved. And you keep reiterating that throughout the project in one form or another, because it sends a message from the top down, but it also gives them that early warning, so they've got a little bit of time to adjust before you start diving into the practicalities of it. So that early communication and awareness is really important. And managing expectations in terms of this is a fairly significant project and it will mean significant change. You don't word it like that necessarily, but because they run for the hills, but that's the reality of it. And very rarely in small businesses, which is my kind of happy place, they're not usually in the habit of adopting formal management practices. So some of the stuff you have to do for ISO is A, a bit of a shock to the system, and B, there's no infrastructure to support it. And sometimes there isn't even a knowledge base to support it. So you have to train that in as well. So you've got to do all of that before you can even create the mechanism or set up the documents, what have you, because there's nothing to underpin it. So that's a much bigger project than just creating some documents and getting them signed off.
Yeah.
But the earlier you can communicate that and get that understood through the business, the better.
Yeah, and it's really interesting that you said, don't phrase it like that. Well, actually, I do. I do.
It depends who you're talking to, maybe.
I do.
Management,
but the reason,
not other people, perhaps.
Well, the reason why I do that is because, again, this is on GDPR. There is this misconception that it's just a bunch of policy and a tick box exercise.
Yeah,
and it isn't. So from the very, very beginning, I do a gap analysis, which shows depth and breadth of the regulation that is not just about cybersecurity. And so all of a sudden they can see where they've got those gaps. And that sort of helps me to then sort of tell them this is a big project. It's it's a big piece of work. It requires your involvement, across the whole organization. It's not just me doing all of the work. I might be the one writing the documents, for example, but the input needs to come from the organization itself. So I make them really clear, because otherwise we're not going nowhere. So I really sort of state the expectations from the beginning. And then, like you, I get them to communicate, because I've done many transformation programs in my past, and there is a particular formula that I use, that was taught to me when I first went into my career. When you're making a change, you need to communicate the why. People need to know why we're doing this in order.
They want the
for them to know.
rationale.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Then you need to tell them what we're changing.
Mm-hmm.
Then we need to tell them how we're doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And potentially where, because it might be just one department or the several departments. It might not be the whole organization, depending on what it is.
Yep.
And then you need to tell them when is this happening.
Yeah.
So I always use that formula to get them to communicate. And so that's crucial.
I think the fundamental rule is, whatever you do, don't leave an information void. Because as soon as people sense that there's change coming, if you don't give them the answers, they will create their own answers, and they will default to the worst possible scenario.
Yes.
And then you've got a massive uphill struggle on your hands to get them to buy in. So yeah, control the narrative. It sounds really manipulative, but it's a necessary thing. You control the narrative, and keep the messaging positive and beneficial.
Yes.
And
absolutely. Whenever there is a change, communication is key, and you can never communicate enough.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah.
I suppose the fundamental difference probably between what you do and what I do is that what you do is a legal requirement. You've got to do this stuff. You've got to do it compliantly, and if you don't, you're in trouble. Whereas with the stuff that I do, if you want to have your certification, you've got to do it compliantly, but you're not going to get into legal trouble if you don't do it right. And the system is designed so that if you have an audit and you're not compliant, and suddenly you get an opportunity to fix it. There's no fines and no penalties. It's not a legal thing. It's much more a voluntary activity for a business, in essence. So I don't quite have that legal clout behind me to state the facts in quite such a straightforward way. However, very often at a later stage in a project, when you start getting into the nitty gritty of setting up some of these systems and activities that they're going to have to start carrying out, often the pushback will come from senior management, because they see this taking up time and potentially costing money and so on. And you start getting the, do we really have to do this question? And then my answer is, if you want to get certified against the ISO 9001 2015 quality management standard, yes, you do. It's your choice. And that is what it comes down to. But obviously that's a specific conversation to address a specific issue from a specific set of people in the business.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I get the same pushbacks in terms of, can we not just do this little bit and not the whole? Can basically cut corners to get quickly. Yeah. And my answer is, yes, we can. But then you're not compliant. Then you're not legally compliant. You're opening yourself to risks, and not just from potential fines but think of your reputation. If something goes wrong, your business reputation is totally ruined. You're opening yourself up to lawsuits from employees or customers. If it's a risk that you want to take, by all means, go ahead. It's not what I would advise. So then they tend to come round, and then once the good thing is that at the end of the journey, they then actually understand and appreciate the benefit that it is giving them as a business.
And that's always my aim as well. I mean, I tend not. There are businesses out there who just need to get that rubber stamp because it's going to get them in with a particular client. It's a commercial driver. I totally understand that. And so they're focused on getting certification rather than the system. And I prefer to focus on the system, and the certification will take care of itself. And that way you actually get the benefit of the system once you're certified, as opposed to it being a sort of a dead thing and all you've got is that rubber stamp. But sometimes it's a bit of a balancing act with a new client. But when I throughout that process, that project, like you, throughout that implementation project, my aim is always to get to the point where, even if at the start of the project they were really just seeing as a commercial need, by the end of the project, they've recognized that actually this is really going to benefit my business, and I'm up for it. And every time I achieve that, that's my satisfaction right there. I've converted someone to the benefits of quality management. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, to me, when you get to the end and you get sort of their recognition, not to me, but recognition in terms of what is done to them, for them, my job is done. Do you know what I mean? I feel so satisfied.
It's the best achievement. Yeah.
Yes. And actually recognize and understand that that is part of their USP. Yeah. And when they get to that point, that's when I'm sort of happy. I'm really happy.
Yeah, me too. I do retained quality management for a client. Well, I do 1 day a month internal auditing, 1 day a month quality management for this client. And once I've got all of that stuff done, then I have a call with the client and we go through the findings and the suggestions and improvements and all of that stuff. And the last time I did this, the call overran, it took a bit longer. And I apologized to my client saying, I'm sorry I've taken up so much of your time. And he said, oh, no, it's fine. I'm actually really enjoying it. And I was honestly, I hesitate to say it's better than a paycheck, but it's certainly, a massive added bonus when you get that response.
Yes, absolutely.
Because you've really done your job, I think, when
Yeah. Right. Next on the list is not assessing what processes are needed, which results in too few. And so core quality activities aren't standardized. There's nothing to use for training, that kind of stuff. I think this is one of yours.
Yeah. So I have seen this on a few occasions. There are certain things that the standard isn't prescriptive about when you must have a procedure in place, really. But there's a standard approach to where you put certain procedures in that most quality management consultants will follow. However, that's not the end of the story, because the purpose of procedures and processes is to, as you rightly say, they're a training document, for one thing. They're also for the purposes of standardization, to make sure everyone's doing the same thing in the same way. They give you something to refer back to when things go wrong. So as part of your root cause analysis, you can track through that process and see, okay, they didn't do that bit, or that piece of machinery's changed, or whatever it might be. And all of those things, they also make your outputs more predictable as well. And all of those things contribute to quality management. So when you're deciding, do we need a process for that or not, you need to consider those factors, not just what does the standard say, but for the purposes of operating our business as effectively as possible, what other process documentation might we need? And usually you end up with a hierarchy. So you've got the very high level core operating procedure. Fundamentally, as a business, we do this. We start off with an inquiry, we end up with an invoice, and in between, we basically do this. And you might have 2 or 3 of those, depending on how many different services you offer. And then in support of that, they are literally supporting processes. And then you can start getting down into things like standard operating procedures, work instructions, how-tos, that kind of stuff, which go down to the tasks involved in each element of that activity. And those are what you would put in front of the operatives, for example, in factory or other departments. And then overarching all of that, you've got your quality management procedures, which are things like document control, internal audit process, complaint handling, all that kind of stuff, which kind of overarches the whole business. So there's a lot of elements to be considered when you start mapping out what processes you're going to have and how they're going to interact. And if you think you've nailed it on day one, you're probably oversimplifying it, because as you get into, in fact, you are definitely oversimplifying it, because as you get into your project, things crop up and you identify that actually there's a risk around that particular activity. It needs to be controlled. Therefore, we need a process for it, So it's an evolving picture, and it's not usually till quite near the end of the project that I would finalize that list of processes and procedures. Yeah. But very often you see a sort of a skeleton set of procedures, and they're not adequate. They don't support the system effectively enough. There aren't enough of them. People hate processes, but they are very helpful and very necessary.
Oh, yes, they are. They're very, and also they're helpful in terms of if you have just practicality point of view, if you have a new employee coming in, you just simply give them the process that you've written. So they can learn how to do their job.
Yeah.
Or how to use your system, IT system, or where to find documentation, etc., so that you don't have to invest in another person inducting them, because it's all documented. So actually it's much more efficient and effective. It also, like you say, standardize and also centralize and optimize how you perform, so your productivity goes up. So there are loads of benefits of having that. And one of the things that I've seen is, because again, processes are not documented, is that someone might leave the business, so that particular activity stop happening.
Yeah, it's gone. All that knowledge is gone. Yeah.
And it's because Annie used to do it. Well, Annie's now left.
Yeah.
So we don't do it anymore, which is something that perhaps gave value to the client. So we're now totally missing that step.
Or worst case, we've still got to do it somehow. We don't really know how she did it. We're going to just have to sort of figure it out. But actually, because we don't really know how to do it, it's going to take us longer, and we might get it wrong, which is going to affect our customer adversely. And that's a very common scenario too.
Yes. So, instead, if all of that knowledge was documented, the how, if Annie leaves, then the company can still carry on. There is no effect to the business and to the client. So, service continuity is still there.
Absolutely. There's so many benefits to having processes in place. I mean, I could go on. I won't, but I could go on about this for hours. And I sometimes do have a little bit of a rant at clients because they're so important. They're the absolute backbone of your whole system. And really the backbone of your business. Whether you have quality management in place or not, you should at least have processes for all sorts of reasons. And that's why it's important to have the right processes and the right number of processes. I'm not an advocate of process for process sake, because that's just bogs you down in documentation. But if there is a need, then you should do it, rather than just taking the approach, we'll just do the absolute bare minimum needed to be compliant with the standard. It's broad.
And the other thing that in my line of work that I notice is that if they want a customer to consent on something and there is two different departments, they both go to the client at different stages for the consent. Why? Do you know what I mean? Just do it once, because you're duplicating. Just do it once. By creating those processes that are standardized, it eliminates duplication. It allows the team to work much more cohesively, rather than in silo. And it also allow that sort of pollution between the two.
One thing, because I work with small businesses, and typically small businesses don't have documented procedures, what I often find is the very action of sitting down and working through that process and getting it on paper is enlightening to a lot of people in that business. Very often top management who look at that and say, well, I didn't know we were doing that. Or why are we doing that? Or that's costing us a fortune. We don't need to be doing that. So it also gives you a massive amount of insight into what's actually happening on the ground. And then you've got the opportunity to fix it and improve it. And of course, every time you review it, then, after that point, you've got an opportunity to review it and update it and improve it and so on as well. But it's really interesting to see the light bulb moments happening when you start mapping something, because, small businesses grow organically very often. It starts off with maybe one person and then he hires a couple of people. And when you're at that very small stage, you pick stuff up by osmosis. You don't necessarily need it to be documented because everyone just knows anyway. But once you get past that point, very often small business owners assume that they know what's going on because they always did in the past, but actually they don't necessarily. And all the things that they don't know can be costing them money very often, resulting in waste, slowing things down, affecting the customer, so their processes are incredibly powerful, and even at that very early stage when you just start looking at them, that you'll get a lot of benefit just from going through that activity of mapping out what you actually are doing currently. Yeah, it's huge.
Right, next online is leave ongoing management to one or two people in the business, or leave it all to the consultant. For me, where I am the DPO, they just say, no, yeah, Cristina will do it, or will manage it. No, because again, it is everybody's responsibility. I cannot be everywhere for a start, in every single department. I cannot be there 24/7. So even practically is not possible. The role of the DPO is there to provide guidance and advice. Is not actually to be doing it, and it's not me that needs to hold you accountable. It's senior management need to hold everybody else accountable, from the top down. So it should be everybody's responsibility, not just one person, one or two people, or the consultant. Because otherwise, all of the work that's been done is just going to die. And then you've got to start all over again. So you wasted time and money for nothing.
Yeah, that exact same thing happens with ISO systems. They put all the effort into getting the system in place, they get certified, then it drops off a cliff, and then the next time they have an audit, they've got a problem. But it goes back to it being cultural. Culture comes from the top. So for that reason, if no other, senior management need to be talking about it and embedding it and supporting it, and actively carrying out their own quality management activities. But the 2015 bit of the standard, so ISO 9001.2015, that's the last time the standard was revised. And they really bumped up the requirements from top management and are somewhat specific about how top management need to be involved. Because back in the day, that's what would happen. You'd get certified and senior management would carry on doing what they'd always done and leave it to the quality manager to do everything.
Who has no power.
They've got no power to enforce anything or to demand actions or to even really follow up effectively. They often have no budgetary control or influence on resources or anything else. And it's too big a job for one person in a lot of businesses as well. So that's why they made the change to make it more effective, so that senior management had to provide resources, had to be communicating, had to set objectives, and so on.
Okay, next on the list is going for speed of delivery rather than depth and breadth. So basically, that will equate to an effective system which doesn't deliver what the expectations were, which we kind of already touched on it a little bit in our previous discussions. But yes, from my side of the equation, it's all about just need a bunch of policy, ticking the box. Yeah, okay, fine, we're done, ready, let's go. And quick training that doesn't do anything. That's what they think it's all about. And we've got cybersecurity, so what else do we need? So definitely the speed seems to be the driver, without understanding that actually this is an investment.
So from my perspective, there are two main reasons why they go for speed. One is, and we touched on this before, there's a strong commercial driver behind them going for certification. And so, we've got according to this massive customer who's waiving this contract in front of us, we've got to get certified in the next 3 months in order for them to use us. And I totally understand that. I don't have a problem with that at all. The other reason that people go for speed, as you've just sort of alluded to there, is that it's purely because they don't understand what's involved. So they don't see why it would take any longer. However, if that commercial driver is what's going on, and as I said, I don't have a problem. I get that. I don't have a problem with it. What I would say is, okay, we can go for speed and get you certified, because the certification is what your client is looking for. But don't stop there. Carry on with the development and the sort of embedding and the implementation work after you've got your certification. And by doing that, by the time you've got your next audit, you'll have a real live system that will take care of the audit for you. Whereas what typically happens is they go for speed, they get certified, they heave a huge sigh of relief because it's ticked that customer's box. They forget all about the quality management system. It sits in a drawer, metaphorically speaking. And then a year down the road, when their surveillance audit is due, someone suddenly panics and thinks we've got a surveillance audit in a month. And then they're in a position where they've got no evidence of a live system, and there's all sorts of shenanigans kicks in at that point, you know, sort of backdating things and trying to create records that don't exist. And it's nonsense. It's stressful. It's a poor use of people's time. And in that entire intervening year, you've had no benefit from your quality management system either, which is what it's there for.
Yeah.
So go for it for commercial reasons by all means, but continue to work on it so that you end up with a proper system.
Yeah. See, I get two type of either. So they want to do it because it's the law, then you know, but they want to do it at minimum cost, minimum effort, because again, they don't understand the benefit behind it. Is just got to do it because it's legal. So we just want to do as quick as we can.
Yeah.
Or like you, they have a client that want to engage with them, but they're doing a due diligence on them because their client is fully GDPR, but they've embraced GDPR completely. So they are now doing their bit, which is due diligence in them.
Yep.
And they've got nothing in place. So they just want to, they come to me and say, well, they've identified these gaps for us. Can you just quickly,
patch it up a bit.
And then that's it, then they're happy, and not realizing. And so like you, then I speak to them and say, yeah, of course we can do that. I get it. But if we do then, once we've done this and you get your contract, we can then actually do the rest, which will strengthen you, put you forward for other similar contract. You don't have to go through this pain again because then you got everything. And you just need to maintain it. And again, you then use it as part of your USP to distinguish you from others. And so then they get it. Then at that point they get it. But the initial is, okay, let's just patch it.
Yeah. And it's understandable, right? Because if you're on the other side of the table signing the checks, as it were, you can see that it's going to take time. It's going to pull people out of the day-to-day. It's going to cost money, potentially going to be disruptive. There's no getting around that.
No.
But it is understanding the fundamental reasons why it's necessary and how you're going to benefit from it. And when I'm talking to prospective clients, even, I have a sort of a pyramid model that explains the benefits of having a quality management system in place, and then the additional benefits of certification. Because the biggest chunk of benefit should come from having a quality management system in place, whether it's certified or not. That's where most of the benefit, if it's live and if it's being used.
Yes.
And then the certification is the cherry on the top. If you can get that message across, then the speed thing becomes less of an issue, because then they understand that the depth and the breadth, and okay, that takes time. I get it.
And I do something similar. So I also to get my client to understand that by doing this piece of work, by embracing the GDPR in its entirety, not just the security side, actually it forces you to work with higher standard, with it sort of brings you as an organization, at a higher performing level. You then become a high performing culture organization, which then actually empowers you and enables you to grow.
Yeah, absolutely. I usually say that a quality management system, again, ISO or not, a quality management system is a tool for growth.
Yeah.
It makes your growth more stable. It makes it much easier to grow. It means your operations are ready when you get that influx of new business. It is very much a tool for growth. It's not just a rubber stamp to win a contract. But again, you have to be using it. It has to be live. You have to maintain it. You have to understand it, and all of that other stuff. But yeah, it's so often talked about in terms of certification and compliance and all that dull stuff, when actually it's a tool for your business that massively underpins and supports growth. And I think that's one of the key messages to get across.
Yes.
Because even when people come to me knowing they want it and knowing they need it, they don't see it in those terms until you sort of lay it out for them. But it's important that they understand that.
Absolutely. And so that leads me to the next actual item that we put on our list. Again, sort of following the depth and the opposite in terms of going for speed rather than the depth and breadth. One of the things that when I take on a client or they've basically used generic documentations which doesn't align with the actual business activities. So, for example, in my case, I see a lot of organizations when I go in where they've downloaded the policies or privacy notices from the internet somewhere, from a site, and they've just adopted them as they are without actually understanding what the policy says. Does it apply to them? Is it even fit for purpose for their business? So, I mean, I had a client where they downloaded a bring your own device policy because they were told that they needed it, when they don't actually allow the employees to use their own devices. So what's the point of having that policy? So it's not fit for purpose. Do you come across the same thing?
Yeah, so I don't have a problem with using, in certain cases, templated documents, certainly for the quality management processes, those overarching ones, because the requirements are fundamentally the same regardless of your business, right? So those things can be templated, and then it's a case of you still have to work on them because you have to make sure that they're applicable for the size of the business, that the roles and responsibilities align with the org chart for that business, even details like sort of storage locations and things like that. So it's a starting point that lays out the key requirements, and then you mold it to suit that business. So in those instances, I don't have a problem with using templates. However, you do, as you've said, you do very often see what are clearly generic procedures and generic policies, quality management policies. And they will get you through, again, they'll get you through your certification because technically you've done what the standard requires you to do, but they won't deliver anything for your business. And if you then actually do try and do those things, you'll find it doesn't really work because it doesn't fit with your business. So there is a place for those kind of pre-templated documents, but you have to be judicial in how you use them. Just using them to say that's our quality management system, as far as I'm concerned, that's not acceptable, and it's not effective.
No, I mean, I don't have an issue either with, especially small businesses, trying to save some money and just download a free policy from the internet. By all means, do that. But then you need to invest the time in reading it and add, stripping out what
it's a starting point only.
Yeah, it's a starting point. So you don't start from so use it as, like you say, a starting point, as an inspiration.
Gives you a structure that you can work to and drop things in, and gives you a bit of a steer, but that should not be your policy.
No, and very often there was a case, and I can't remember the details of it, but where basically, an organization had downloaded these data protection policies. They sort of said, we follow our data breach process, and then they had a data breach, and I can't remember how the RCO got involved in it. But basically, the policy said, we follow our internal data breach process. They didn't have a data breach process.
That's the other thing. You have to cross-reference. Yeah.
So this is telling you that they've not read it.
Nice one.
So
big red flag right there, isn't it?
Yes. So I mean, they didn't get fined. I think they just got sort of a reprimand, a sort of slap on the hand. But this teaches you. You've got to read it. You've got to understand it. So, well, it mentions here such and such. Do we have one? It mentions here, we're using, I don't know, Google Analytics. Are we using that? And
do we actually have that system in the business?
yeah. It has to be in line with the business.
Absolutely,
Yes.
absolutely, and proportionate to the business. Because
Yes.
some of these things, I mean, I've got my own set of sort of
Yes.
template documents, obviously.
So do I.
But
Yeah.
when you start pulling stuff off the internet, if you're not very careful, you're a small business and you're looking at something that's designed for a PLC, or vice versa. You're a big company and you're looking at something that's designed for a small business and doesn't have enough coverage or what. You do have to be really careful. But that's where consultants come in, because we're the ones with the knowledge to say, okay, that's compliant, that will work with your business, that's applicable. We don't need that paragraph, that, that's where we come into it and can kind of tailor it. But the over reliance on templated documents or generic documents is it might get you through in the short term, but it's not a good plan.
And I think also there is these false sense of security, because very often these templates are downloaded from like a solicitor's website or online solicitor's firm. So there is this false sense of security because a lawyer has written it, so it must be right.
Yeah.
It must be right as it is, 100%. We can't touch it. Which is not the case at all.
No, it might be right for a specific business, but it's not automatically right. Yeah.
Not for everybody. Yes.
No. It takes time to write these things up for a reason.
Yes. That's why solicitors or consultants charge money, because it does take time and effort.
Yeah. And knowledge. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Right. Next one is not training people effectively.
Mm-hmm.
I'll let you start with this one.
Okay. So the bare minimum in terms of an ISO, if you're going for ISO certification, the bare minimum is that you carry out what they call awareness training. It doesn't tell you what that is particularly or what it needs to cover. Essentially it's saying the people in your business must be aware that you have a 9001 quality management standard and what their responsibilities are. I mean, you can draw your own conclusions from that, and people do. I obviously do awareness training with my clients, but I talk about that pyramid model that I mentioned earlier so that they fully understand what comprises a system, what the benefits are from that system, what the different elements are of it. I dispel a whole bunch of myths and misconceptions. I explain to them what their involvement will be in the project, what their involvement will be post-certification, how audits work, the sort of all the big hitters, if you like, in that whole project. But that's just the starting point. The rest of the project, training for the rest of the project, depends on the business and their needs. There's always going to be process training required because you'll be putting some new processes in place, and people need to understand those and accept them and have an opportunity to ask any questions. So process training is a big element of it. But then alongside that, this is where I like to believe I add some value as a consultant. You will encounter needs as you go through the project. So it could be, for example, that if it's a very small business, the management team of that business aren't familiar with SMART objectives. So we'll have a little session on what are SMART objectives, right? And how do KPIs relate to objectives, that sort of thing. It could be that as in a sort of a bigger business, and I've got this with one of my clients at the moment, there needs to be some specific training on how to manage non-conformities. Now, there will be a procedure put together for that, but it's broader than that. So what is this thing that we're talking about? What's a non-conformity? What does that really mean? Why is it important? Where do they come from? How do we control them? How do we manage them? What is root cause analysis? How do we do that? So there's a whole workshop there about managing non-conformities. So as the need arises, we train where we need to, so that by the end of the project, your business is actually not only do they understand the system, but they've got the skills and the knowledge to maintain and manage the system and contribute to the system. Because just putting the system in and making them aware of it doesn't equip them to do that.
No.
So
no, I mean, for me, in my area, so I come across different scenarios. So I come across scenarios where, when the regulation first came out, organization invested in some in-depth training, and then they've done nothing since. So that was 5 years ago.
And it's all been forgotten in the meantime. Yeah, or changed probably. Yeah.
So all of that, it's sort of need refreshing, or they have implemented some refresher training, but it's from their learning management system. So it's just a very top level e-learning combined with phishing and cybersecurity, all combined together, with tick boxes. And by the end of it, if you were to ask them an hour later, whether they remember anything of the e-learning, is all gone.
Yeah.
There's no retainable. They don't find it where they can relate to it or how to apply it to their day-to-day job.
No context.
So it's done. So there is a client where they have sort of office staff as well as clinical staff. So this e-learning that they use or they've been using as part of their refresher and onboarding, it's all from the clinical side. Mm-hmm. So the people in the office, they can relate to it, or they've just done just e-learning, nothing else.
Yeah.
So when I then do my training, all of a sudden, oh, wow, I didn't know that. Oh, this is brilliant. Oh, I can do this now. I can do that. Or now I understand, blah, blah, blah. So all of a sudden they can relate, they can, apply it. Now you can then use proper e-learning created by a professional in the field to then year on year to refresh elements of the regulation.
Underpin it, refresh it, consolidate.
You can do that in many different ways. You can do a bit of e-learning that perhaps this year we're going to focus on data breaches, because from the audit that Cristina has carried out, we've actually had quite a lot of data breaches. None of them were of high risk, but we still have quite a lot. So maybe we need to just, retrain everybody on data breaches. So then you do e-learning specific on data breaches. You can also do communications, newsletter, to give them little points, a little tips. From the audit, there have been quite a large number of emails sent to the wrong recipient. Here's a tip on how you can avoid that, or you can reduce that. So it can be done in so many different ways, but it has to be consistent.
Yeah.
And then maybe, every other year you do the workshop again.
Yeah.
Everybody in the room, so that, as I said, it's consistent and you are building on top of it.
Yeah. E-learning's great and it has its place.
Yes.
But if you are trying to train people, and I'm speaking as a former trainer now, if you're trying to train people to apply a particular activity or behavior or skill in the workplace, e-learning is not sufficient. You need the best thing, as you said, is a workshop where you're providing the information in a context which they understand. And I usually try and send them away with an action plan or a set of objectives or something like that, so that they've got something that they actually have to do. They're not just thinking of, like you say, the minute they walk out the door, they're back to the day-to-day, all the usual pressures kick in and that's forgotten about. They've got something that they actually have to then pick up and apply and make real in their day-to-day work, which can also be followed up on. And that's how that stuff actually gets embedded in the business. And then, like you say, you can do 6 months down the line, you can do a little refresher spot about that thing, just test their knowledge and make sure that nothing's shifted or what have you. But you can't rely on e-learning to impart that skill set such that they then go and implement it in their day-to-day activities. It just doesn't work like that.
No, not at all. And like you say, e-learning has a place, absolutely. I do have some e-learning training that I do sell, but it's broken down in terms of elements of the regulation. Is not overarching, because people don't it doesn't fit, it doesn't go in. So, and it's done with real life examples so people can relate to it, how to apply it. So yeah, it needs to be relatable, it needs to be engaging. That's how people learn. And very often e-learning isn't, even if there's got a lot of cartoons going on.
And you have to have not everyone, if you want to get really technical about it, not everyone learns in the same way.
No.
So you have to have that spread, so that across the spread you're picking up as many people as possible.
Absolutely. Yes.
Not everyone's great in a classroom environment. Some people are better sort of locked down with their headphones on and things as well, albeit sometimes you've got to force them into the room and use your teaching skills to get them to open up and contribute and take part. But yeah, you do need that. But yeah, you're right. It's consistent. It's coverage and consistency and content are the three things in the sort of the context of what we do.
Yeah. And it's really interesting because, like you, at the end of the training, I sort of get them to write down what they're going to do, how they're going to implement, 3 actions that they're going to do. And then I collect them and I then say to their line manager, now they need to go into their objectives. And that's, you know what I mean? So that's how, again, it's how it gets embedded in so that it's not forgotten.
It makes it real.
Yes. Right. So the next one is not involving senior management, not making quality or GDPR one of their responsibilities. So I think I've touched already. For me, it's the IT department responsibility. We got it all covered. We are GDPR compliant. It's with the IT. Or the HR is also the DPO, which you can't have because it's conflict of interest. So again, it's against the law. So they tend to be delegated rather than understanding that the top layer is accountable and they are the one that need to take it on, accept it, understand it, and then drive it down. So that's what I come across.
So for me, I think it's that. So we've already talked about the fact that you can't leave it to one person and that management have responsibilities. But this for me is kind of the next level in terms of, it's one thing saying senior management need to be talking about this and kind of walking the walk, talking the talk and so on, which they do 100%. But for me, the ideal is to get that senior management team making quality management part of running the business. So when they're having those senior management meetings, looking at the state of the nation and EBITDA and whatever else they're talking about, they're also, and it's a bit like health and safety used to be. It used to be kind of someone else deals with that. And now you'll often find that health and safety is one of the things on the agenda for senior management meeting. Quality needs to be on there as well.
Yes.
That's what I'm getting at. So they need to see that quality management is part of running the business, just like sales, just like marketing, just like health and safety. Quality is one of the things that they are responsible for, big picture, in terms of running that business and making it successful.
Yes.
So it just kind of notches the responsibility up a bit.
And it's really interesting that you say that, because one of the things that I cover when I do the gap analysis is GDPR, data protection, an agenda item on the board.
Yeah.
And if it's not, you got a gap, because it needs to be, because actually it is a requirement. So the ICO has created an accountability framework. And one of the things, the first is I think it's 10 layers. The first layer is leadership. So that's quite important. And that's where you've got to have data protection as part of how you run the business. So it needs to be part of your board agenda. Yeah. Then you've got policies and procedures, and then you've got training. So those are the 3 top elements. And in fact, data breaches and security come further down. So that's really interesting. That I'm not saying they're not important. I'm not saying security is not important, but it's not at the top. It's not the only thing that counts. And in fact, it's just one article out of 68. So that just puts it into perspective.
Yeah.
But
in
yes,
fairness, the quality management standard requires that the business carries out a management review meeting once a year. Well, a minimum of once a year. And many companies do just do it once a year. But that's a slightly different thing, because that is a very focused meeting, which is all about the quality management system. Yeah. So you're reviewing your interested parties, you're reviewing your objectives, your policy, looking at ends, non-conformities, haven't got enough resources to support the system, all of that sort of stuff. So it's totally focused around the quality management system and its performance. And for my money, once a year probably isn't enough, because a lot can happen in a year. So by making it part of the standard, one of the agendas on the standard management meeting, again, it's embedding it much more effectively. Yes. And making it part of the day-to-day. The best thing you can achieve is making quality management part of the day-to-day of the business, just like all that other stuff is. And then again, your audits will take care of themselves, because it's little and often, and it's far more effective than one annual management review meeting a year, albeit you still have to cover that somehow. But again, if you've got quality on your standard management agenda for your monthly management meeting, you don't need to have a separate management review meeting, because you're meeting the requirements by doing it every month.
Yes.
So,
yes. Yeah.
It makes sense. But
yeah. And
that's the idea.
So yeah, and the same, data protection is part of your DNA as a business.
Yeah.
What it needs to be. And so it needs to be part of your agenda at the board meeting, like marketing, like health and safety, like HR, all of those elements, finance, GDPR as his own element as part of the org. Yeah.
100%.
So the next one is not considering GDPR or quality in new initiatives, whether, for example, it's a new shining product or a new process or a new provider of services. So totally sort of, again, not considering the quality side or the data protection side in my case.
Yeah. So this comes back to change, essentially.
Yes.
You're making a significant change in your business. And the focus is all about how much is it going to cost, who's going to be responsible for what, how long is it going to take, and so on. And very often they will do a risk assessment, but the risk assessment will look at things like downtime, potentially, things like that. But often quality is not a specific heading. And it's not a specific consideration under the risk assessment, and it should be. Because the whole point of having a quality management, or one of the key points of having a quality management system, is that you are consistently reducing and removing the risk of negatively affecting customer satisfaction. So change involves risk. What are the risks to customer satisfaction? And what do we need to do to mitigate those? And that element often is missing from the risk assessment, unfortunately.
Yeah, and it's really interesting, because the regulation, the GDPR, actually demands that you carry out what is called a DPIA, Data Protection Impact Assessment, which is basically a risk assessment when you're implementing a change. If you're introducing, say, for example, a new IT system, a new process, a new provider, etc., you need to do that assessment. And very often it's either not done, or it's done very superficially.
Yeah, too late.
So, I mean, from the GDPR is interested in protecting the rights and freedom of the individual, not of the business.
Sure.
So what I often do to ensure that my client carries out this assessment is that I give them a change management process. This is the technical side.
Took the words right out of my mouth. Yeah. That is why you have a change management procedure in place, so that you make sure that everything, you basically then just follow that procedure. You can't go wrong, because the procedure says you've got to do your GDPR assessment. You've got to do the impact assessment on customer service and quality. You can't go wrong then, really.
Yes. So I give them, very often they never heard of it. Yeah. So, because very often, or not very often, but sometimes there is a misconception, or change management it's two sides of it. One is the technical side, if you want, or the process itself, and one is the people change. Yeah. So the two sides of the equation, if you want, of the of the coin. So I leave them with the technical side of the change management. So it's a process, so that within it, at the specific step, they've got to do the impact assessment. So at least they're doing it.
Yeah.
And then we work on the quality of it because that is important. There was recently a case that was all over the news. So where Circle, which is quite a large corporation, they manage gyms as well as leisure centre and various other stuff, prisons and hospitals and so on. And they introduced a fingerprint login system for the employees so that the organization could then monitor when their employees were coming into work and were leaving. So the ICO went in, did an an audit on them, and they received an enforcement notice where they have to delete all of the data, because obviously fingerprints is biometric data. So they've got to remove all of it. They've got to delete it. They've got to stop doing it. They've got 3 months to do it. Otherwise, they get fined. Now, they did do a DPIA, but the outcome of that was that it was not in-depth enough.
Okay.
So the quality of it, it's important. So they hadn't considered or not in-depth enough, the consequences to the employees in this case about their rights and freedom. Because when you start collecting and monitoring people's in your working environment, when you're not in your environment really, you're also tracking their behavior. And over time, when you start layering the information, that it starts giving you all lots of personal data about the individual.
Yeah, which they don't necessarily need to operate as a business. So it exceeds the boundaries of what's reasonable, I suppose, in principle.
Yes,
right?
absolutely. Yeah. And also one of the things that's interesting is that there is an expectation of privacy in the workplace, and that it's a human right. But also, and this one is from ACAS, where the employer must ensure, it is the employer responsibility to ensure that it doesn't break the trust with their employees, because that could then lead to constructive dismissal.
Yeah. No, that makes perfect sense. So in theory, then there would have been a way to do it because lots of companies have fingerprint scanners, right? So there would be a way to do it which was compliant, but they needed more controls in terms of how that information was used and who could access it and for how long and all that kind of thing.
Yes, it's also, why do you need to monitor in terms of so strictly? Yeah. When your employee comes in and comes out, where is the trust there? You know what I mean? So then you need to understand the culture behind that. Has there been incidents where they sort of justified the introduction of this system? Or was it introduced initially, say, for example, for security measures as a security?
I was going to say, if it's a security requirement, that's one thing. But if it's a time and motion tracker, that's another thing altogether.
Yeah. So perhaps originally, the case doesn't go into this step. I wonder whether perhaps it was introduced initially as a way of security,
and then someone thought
authorized personnel can go through, and then somehow that data is now being used for a secondary purpose over time.
Yeah,
well, that could have been the case. I
don't know, wouldn't it? Yeah.
It would be interesting to see that their DPIA, what that DPIA says. But this is what I mean. It's not just about doing it. It needs to be done properly.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the same with all of these things. And there's lots of things that come behind that, like training and understanding and buy-in and so on. It's one thing having a great procedure, but you've still got to make sure that people understand it and follow it and,
Yes.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay, then the next one is not including quality or GDPR in management meetings or company communication. So we kind of touched already this a little bit earlier on. But in my case, for example, where in those organizations where I am the DPO, some of them have totally embraced it, and I'm part of the team, and I do get to attend those board meetings, which is where I can sort of give my value. That's where they get my value from. But some are resistant to that. But the downside of that is that they then don't get the value out of it. And the more I'm involved, the more I understand your business, the more I understand the strategy, because again, usually a board meeting, you talk a lot about strategic elements. The more I can be value to you and give you the guidance and advice you pay me for, the more you keep me at length, the less value you get.
Yeah.
So so that it's a cultural side to this.
Yeah, and it's a tricky one, because I can understand, I'm sort of in a similar position. I can understand why some businesses wouldn't want me involved in those meetings. I get it, because they're talking about finances and things. I totally get that. Yeah. On the other hand, if you want to have some valuable input on the quality side of it, it makes sense to involve me, even if it's only for that chunk of the meeting.
Yes.
For the smaller companies where they do a management review meeting and they don't have those regular sort of separate management meetings where they can cover it off, and we have a specific management review meeting, I chair those meetings for them as part of the service that I offer. And so we get the absolute maximum out of those. It's where a company is choosing to cover quality, the management review bit by bit through those general management meetings that it's tricky. It's you can't force them, obviously, to involve you.
No.
But, the other side of it for me as well, the communication side of it, is, again, it's about sort of, there's two elements to that. One is about spreading the word from the top down and making it very visible as part of what the company talks about. So they'll talk about, companies will often tell their staff, well, we've been really profitable this year, or we've just won this big new customer, or we've got a new member of staff, or what have you. But they're not talking about, we've had 3 audits in a row with 0 non-conformities, isn't that great? Or, whatever it might be. So, and there's benefit to be gained from doing that. And the other thing, this is a minor thing, but it never ceases to amaze me. Companies that are ISO, so if you look on a company website, it's often very difficult to determine whether they're ISO certified or not, because they don't talk about it on their website. Even though it's a selling point, they don't talk about it.
Yeah.
And if they do, it's buried somewhere in the website, and there'll be a tiny little badge on there with their certification. And it's really difficult to establish if they're certified or not. Now, I would say this because I'm a quality management practitioner, but for my money and their money, literally, having put all the effort in to get certified, tell people that you're certified.
Tell the world,
Tell them that you're certified. Tell them what it does for your business and how great it is for your customers, and all the benefits you get from this thing. Tell people.
Absolutely, yes, absolutely. Now the next one is specific to you. So it's internal audit not done often enough.
Yeah. Okay. So the internal audit is supposed to drive continuous improvement. That's its function, largely. And it does that by picking up non-conformities and spotting things that can be improved, and picking up errors and things like that. According to the standard, you only have to do that once a year. That's the minimum requirement. And there are businesses that literally do it once a year. And all that does is establish that you're compliant with the standard. That's great. That's important. But what it's not doing, you might pick up a few improvements here and there, but your business is dynamic. Your quality management system should also be dynamic. And the only way you can really drive and keep on top of improvements and fixing errors and sorting out non-conformities is to check them regularly. And the mechanism for that is the internal audit. Now, in fairness, it depends a bit on the nature of your business and what you do, and what your internal resources look like and things like that. However, I would advocate, as a bare minimum, quarterly. Some companies, I do it monthly, little and often every month.
Yeah.
But quarterly, if you're doing it any less than quarterly, you're not going to be getting any benefit from it. And people don't understand how internal auditing needs to work. You have to audit the entire system through an audit cycle. You have a 12-month schedule. You have to have a plan scheduled to show an auditor that you've planned it. You have to cover the whole system. You have to audit the whole system. If you're only doing that once a year, that's an awful lot to cover in a day or two, for starters. So that you're not going to deep dive on very much, probably. Whereas if you're doing it little and often, every month you can look at one bit of the standard. Are they compliant with that? And you can look at it in reasonable depth. And then you can look at one bit of the operational elements of the system as well. Processes, for example, are people following their processes? And that way you're going to pick up every little thing that you can find in that audit and improve it for next time.
Yeah.
That's why you need to do auditing more often than once a year. Because once a year, it is literally, are we compliant with the standard? Tick, 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 tick. That's all you're going to get. I understand that the more often you have internal audits, the more it costs you, because you're paying me for my time. But on the other hand, less time is going to be needed at external audit stage because everything will be in order. Right. Yes. So it's a trade-off.
Yes.
Much better way to do it.
Absolutely. Right. There is a couple next that are just GDPR specific. So for me, one of the mistakes that I see, it's an organization using the wrong channel to either create or publish the privacy notice. So they either get a lawyer, for example, to create it, when actually it's not supposed to be in legal jargon, supposed to be in written in plain English. Think of who the audience is. The audience is either your customers or your employees or your volunteers, depending on the line of your business. So it needs to be actually written in plain language in such a way that a teenager can understand it. The ICO, for example, have created one that it's got cartoons, pictures in it. EasyJet, they've created a video. So actually, it should not be a lawyer writing it because it's not a legal document. It's to inform your data subject, your audience, on how you're going to use the data.
Yeah.
It also then it's buried in the HR handbook. Again, that's not how it should be. It's not part of your policies, should not be in any handbook. It should be on your website if it's for your customers, if it's for your employees. They should have been receiving one or made it available to them. If you got like an intranet kind of system, or if you got Google Workplace. If you are recruiting or when you are recruiting, that a privacy notice specific for recruiting should be sent to the candidate as soon as they make contact with you. When you are employing, when you are a new employee, when you are sort of confirming that they got the job or telling them they got the job, you send them the privacy notice there and then. So before you send them the contract, before you start collecting any data. So it should not be buried in any handbook of any kind.
It's a public statement of intent, right? So it should be.
That's right.
Yeah. Yes.
So again, another mistake is they tend to mix privacy policy with privacy notice. There's those are two separate documents. So a notice, like you said, is a statement, is an external statement to someone to tell them how you're doing something. A policy, it's internal, it provides guideline and sometimes instructions to your employee on how to do something. So the purpose is very different. Another one that I come across is an organization that relies on their website designer to put in place the quick consent pop-up, on the website. I see so many that are wrong. And it's not the website designer's job to know what is right. He's just going to go and pick up a plugin. It's up there available. He doesn't know what's right or wrong. Data protection, or in this case is the PECA, is not his area of expertise. So you need to know as a business what your requirements are. So you need to tell them this is what it needs to look like. This is what the proper consent needs to have. And the other one, there is still a lot of, I think sometimes it's intentional from the marketing side, marketing department or market experts, they are disguising purposely the soft opt-in, soft opt-out and consent in regard to marketing. I saw one the other day where you had 3 options to with regards to direct marketing. So by signing up to this, I think it was a training session, then there was no option to opt out. So you automatically be signed in to their mailing list, but then you could choose 1 or 3 options. What was it? I think it was silver, gold, or platinum. So the silver, so you're thinking, okay, from my perspective, I'm thinking, okay, so the silver must be the one with the least protection, and then the platinum must be the one with the highest protection. No. So the silver was the one where you would only get like a monthly newsletter. The platinum is the one where you would get every day, you would get something promotional in nature. So again, A is misleading. You're not being transparent. There is no such thing as, silver, gold, and platinum or bronze, or whatever. It's either yes or no. End of story.
Yeah.
So you're either in or you're out. And so sometimes these are done intentionally by volunteers to confuse you
in the hope that you'll end up opting in whether you actually wanted to or not. The tick box ones are frustrating, that you have to read the wording next to the tick box, because sometimes it'll say, it starts off with, this is a bad example, but it'll say, if you do not, so you think, okay, I don't want marketing, so I'm going to tick that. But actually, if you read it, it says, if you do not wish to opt out of our marketing,
untick it.
Tick here. Yeah. So actually, you're opting in. That stuff makes me so cross, because it is deliberately misleading.
It's deliberate, yes, absolutely. Or you will find that it's already ticked.
So and you have to untick it. Yeah.
When actually it's the other way around. To be legal, you have to tick it. It can't be ticked already by default.
You can't manipulate people into it. You have to be.
Or the other one is where all of the cookies or the non-necessary are on by default unless you switch them off. When actually it shouldn't be like that. They should be off by default, and then they go on when you click consent or accept or something like that. So so again, it's really, again, this is marketeers doing it illegally, because they, this is illegal, to trick us. And so unless you know and you're looking for it, and that makes me cross, and it makes me, and when I see it, straight away, you've lost my trust. Straight away, I don't want to do business with you. And
I'll find another website. Yeah.
So actually, you're not winning anything.
No. And even if you do manage to scoop up a few people inadvertently, once they get wise, they'll leave you anyway. So,
because one of the key principles of the regulation is transparency. You've got to be transparent to be compliant. So that is not transparent, is it? No. That is actually the opposite of it.
Yeah, it's murky.
So Annie, it's been fantastic talking to you, as always.
Likewise.
Would you like to let people know how to get in touch with you?
Sure. So I have a website, which is anniemacneely.co.uk. I can be found on LinkedIn under my own name, Annie MacNeely. And my email address is on LinkedIn. So if you want to get a hold of me, just drop me a line at annie@anniemacneely.co.uk.
Fantastic. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, and remember to click subscribe at the bottom. We also have the podcast on Spotify and Apple. If you prefer an audio only podcast, just search for Why Such a Fuss. And finally, if you would like to get in touch with me, I can be found on LinkedIn, Facebook, or Instagram. Just search for CVG Solutions. Or you can email me at info@cvgsolutions.co.uk. Thank you for listening.